All right, folks, buckle up. We're about to take a deep dive into some seriously heavy stuff.
Oh, yeah. Heavier than usual.
You bet. We're talking Immanuel Kant.
Ah!
That's right, the critique of pure reason. You might be surprised to learn that his ideas, especially his ideas about intuition, can actually help us understand some pretty down-to-earth things.
Like what? Give me an example.
Well, things like risk perception, how journalists approach interviews, even the way we get caught up in those heated political debates online. You know what I mean?
Okay, I'm listening, but first you're going to have to remind me about Kant.
Right, of course. So one of the big ideas in Kant's work is this concept called a priori intuition. And it's basically the idea that our own personal experiences of space and time shape how we see the world, how we understand things.
So, like, two people could look at the same situation, and because of their different pasts, they'd react in completely different ways.
Exactly. Think about it like investing in a volatile stock. Someone who's made a ton of money in the market might be like, yeah, let's do it. But someone who's lost a lot of money, maybe they'd be much more hesitant. Their past experiences color their whole perception of the risk.
Makes sense. Our space and time, as Kant would say, shapes our reality.
Right. And here's where things get even more interesting. We were talking about this academic paper, the one that uses Kant's ideas to analyze how journalists covered the COVID-19 pandemic in Brazil, remember?
Yeah, I think I remember something about how journalists could have gotten better answers by asking different types of questions.
Exactly. And we've got an expert here today who's going to break down the highlights of that paper for us.
Well, thanks. So this paper looks at a press briefing given by Brazil's new health minister right in the middle of the pandemic. It focuses on how journalists ask their questions and argues that, well, they could have gotten way more insightful answers if they had tapped into the minister's a priori intuition.
So what does that actually mean? Instead of focusing on the current situation, they should have tried to uncover how his past experiences might be influencing his decisions.
Precisely. The paper says that simply relying on prior knowledge might not be enough to really understand how someone makes decisions when things are uncertain, when there's risk involved. You have to consider their individual space and time, their own personal history with similar situations to truly understand where they're coming from.
Okay, I'm following you. So it's not about journalists prying into the minister's personal life, right? It's about understanding how those experiences might be shaping his decisions right now, especially during a pandemic when the stakes are so high.
Absolutely. And the paper gets really specific. It actually takes direct quotes from the minister and then suggests alternative a priori intuition questions based on those quotes.
Oh, that's cool. I remember that.
Yeah, and one of the quotes that really stood out to me was when the minister said, and I quote, "The government knows very little about the novel coronavirus and COVID-19."
Yeah, that's a pretty revealing statement, right? Kind of makes you wonder if they were prepared at all.
Right. It definitely suggests a possible lack of understanding at a really critical time. But imagine if a journalist had followed up with a question rooted in the minister's personal experience, something like, what is your experience with pandemics?
Oh, wow. You can really feel the difference with that kind of question, can't you?
Right. It's not about what the government knows anymore. It's putting the minister on the spot, forcing him to reflect on his own experiences and potentially revealing some weaknesses in his authority. It's all about understanding how those personal experiences shape someone's view of the world, especially when it comes to risk. Like, some people were totally fine with all those public health guidelines during the pandemic, masking and social distancing, while others were completely against it.
Yeah, I get that. Everyone assesses risk differently, right?
Yeah.
It's like some people love roller coasters, while others are terrified of them. Same experience, totally different reactions.
Exactly. And that's where just relying on the facts and figures like infection rates or whatever might not tell the whole story. You have to dig deeper into those individual experiences to really understand why people do what they do. Remember that quote from the minister we talked about earlier, the one where he said, "The government knows very little about the novel coronavirus and COVID-19.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Kind of a scary admission, wasn't it?
It was. And instead of just accepting that at face value, the paper suggests that journalists could have used that as an opportunity to probe the minister's a priori intuition.
Okay. How so?
Well, imagine a follow-up question like, what is your experience with pandemics?
Oh, I see what you mean. You're shifting the focus from the government as this big abstract entity to the minister as an individual.
Exactly. It's like, don't just tell us what the government knows. Tell us what you know, based on what you've personally experienced.
It's holding them accountable in a whole new way.
Exactly. And the paper argues that this kind of approach could be super valuable, not just in journalism, but in any situation where you're trying to understand someone's motivations, especially when risk and uncertainty are involved.
So this goes way beyond just getting a good quote from a politician.
For sure. It's a fundamental shift in how we approach communication and decision making, especially when those decisions affect other people.
It's about recognizing that everyone, from world leaders to, like, our neighbors, sees the world through their own unique lens, shaped by their experiences.
Exactly. And we can understand those experiences, we can communicate better, build better relationships, and make better decisions.
It's making me think about how this applies to so many different areas, like market research, to understand what consumers really want, or even conflict resolution, to get to the root of disagreements.
Right. It's all about understanding human behavior and motivations.
And what I really like about this paper is that it doesn't just present a theory. They give all these concrete examples, like that table with the quotes and the suggested questions. It really brings it to life.
And that's what makes it so original, It takes this philosophical concept and shows how it can be used in the real world. There's tons of research on media bias and stuff, but this paper really stands out by focusing on Kant's a priori intuition and applying it to journalism.
It's like they're taking a concept that's usually stuck in the ivory tower and showing how it can actually make a difference, especially when we're dealing with uncertainty and crisis, like during the pandemic.
It's about giving journalists and anyone who analyzes communication the tools to really understand the motivations behind the events they're reporting on.
So we've talked a lot about how journalists can use a priori intuition. But let's get back to that press briefing with Brazil's health minister. Are there any other examples of these kinds of questions in the paper?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And each one shows how these questions can be used like a scientific method, to test a hypothesis.
So instead of just taking what someone says at face value, you're using these questions to see if their statements hold up when you dig a little deeper.
Exactly. And that can be really helpful in revealing inconsistencies or biases. For example, the minister was talking about the economic impact of the pandemic and how a recession could hurt health insurance coverage and put even more strain on the public health system, which makes sense on the surface.
Yeah, if the economy's bad, people lose their jobs, can't afford health insurance, and the system gets overloaded.
Right. But the paper suggests flipping the script with an a priori intuition question, something like, do you know how many Brazilians right now have private health insurance?
Oh, wow. So instead of this general statement about the economy and healthcare, you're forcing him to confront a specific fact.
Right. You're asking him to ground that abstract statement in reality.
Yeah, and by asking that, you might uncover a gap in his understanding or even a bias toward protecting private healthcare instead of focusing on the needs of everyone.
Wow. It really brings it all back down to earth, doesn't it? Yeah, and remember, this all comes from that table in the paper, table 1, I think, where they put those quotes and questions side by side. You can really see the difference.
It's like they're using those a priori intuition questions to actually test what the minister is saying, like a scientific method, right? You have your hypothesis, and then you see if it holds up.
Exactly, and if what he's saying doesn't match up with his own space and time, his experiences, then it makes you question if his reasoning is sound or even what his real motivations are.
Okay, so let's look at another example. The paper also talked about how the minister discussed those exit strategies, the plans for lifting lockdown measures and getting the economy going again. That was a huge debate in Brazil, right?
Absolutely. Everyone was putting pressure on the government to balance public health with the economy. It was so uncertain and people were really anxious.
And that's where people's different perceptions of risk really come into play, right? Some people wanted to reopen quickly, while others were scared of another wave.
Exactly. In the briefing, the minister talked about needing national guidelines that could be adapted to local situations. He even mentioned specific metrics like infection numbers, hospital beds, and staffing levels. It sounded pretty logical and data-driven.
Right. But then the paper throws in another one of those a priori intuition questions. Instead of asking about those national guidelines or abstract metrics, they suggest asking, how would you instruct a small shop on safely resuming operations?
Right. It's brilliant. It's not about these big ideas anymore. It's about a real situation that makes him think about how his policies actually work.
It's like asking a general how they'd win a battle. Instead of talking strategy, you're asking about the specific tactics.
Yeah.
Getting down to the details that they usually skip over.
Exactly. And that question might show that the minister hasn't really thought about the challenges that small businesses face or how to even implement those safety protocols in different places.
It's like you said, holding his feet to the fire, but in a way that's connected to his space and time, his understanding of how things actually work.
Exactly, and the paper says that these questions can be really good at showing inconsistencies or problems in someone's logic. It's not about trying to trick the minister, it's about making him think more deeply and explain his ideas more clearly.
Which is good for everyone, right? If he can't explain a simple thing like how a shop can reopen safely, it makes you wonder if he can handle the whole crisis. It makes you question if he's really in touch with reality.
Yeah, it shows that disconnect between what people say and what's really happening.
You know, this is really eye-opening. I'm starting to see these a priori intuition questions everywhere. Now it's like a secret code for figuring out what's really motivating people.
And that's a powerful tool to have, whether you're a journalist, a business leader, or just trying to understand your relationships and make decisions.
So this paper is more than just about journalism. It's about encouraging us to use this approach to get better information and hold people accountable.
The paper says that journalists can be more active in shaping public discourse by using a priori intuition in their questions. It's not just about reporting what happens, it's about understanding why it happens.
It's like they're saying, don't just watch the chaos, use your questions to make sense of it.
Right, and by focusing on the personal experiences of people in power, journalists can help the public understand the challenges better, especially during times of crisis when good communication is so important.
This has been amazing. We started with this kind of abstract philosophical idea, and now we see how it can change the way we communicate, make decisions, and even deal with uncertainty and risk.
It all comes back to a priori intuition, how our experiences shape how we see the world.
So what does this mean for you, our listeners? Here's the takeaway. Kant's ideas can help us understand how personal experiences influence everything from how we see risk to how we make decisions and how we interact with the world. And that's true for everyone, from politicians to journalists to all of us trying to figure out life.
And remember, we saw how it works in journalism, but it's not limited to that.
Think about how you can use this in your own life next time you're facing a tough decision or trying to understand something complicated. Ask yourself how your own experiences might be affecting your view. Could someone else see things differently? And how can you use that knowledge to make better choices or have better conversations?
It's about understanding that we all see the world through our own unique lenses, and if we understand those differences, we can connect better, build empathy, and make better decisions for ourselves and everyone else.
That's a great thought to leave you with. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. Until next time.